Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schouts and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rulebooks for contracting with the Defense Department. We have been moving sequentially, so we started with DFARS Part 201 in January, and we will be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you have any questions for our speaker today, we'll have her information on the last slide of the presentation. And thank you to all of our sponsors. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTACs can offer. Set Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss sources, sought, and solicitation announcements, providing details so you can jump on the hot ones. Every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. Please join the Reston Chamber of Commerce Government Contractors Council for regular meetings. Please contact Elisa Field with the email shown on the screen if you have any questions. C3 Integrated Solutions, a full-service IT provider that specializes in securing our nation's defense industrial base with cloud-based solutions and industry-leading partners. For more than 13 years, C3 has provided boutique tech services, including services, security, and Microsoft 365 integration services. C3 specializes in Microsoft government cloud solutions, including GCC, GCC High, and Azure Gov, helping clients achieve CMMC, DFARS, and NIST 800-171 compliance. C3 offers an award-winning tailored approach to each client, regardless of size and across a variety of industries. WorkPlan is the only ERP system built for government contractors that's both easy to use and robust. WorkPlan is affordable and scalable to contractors of all sizes. The system includes everything needed for DCAA compliant accounting, time and expense, incurred cost submission, project budgeting, and forecasting, and more. To see how WorkPlan can work for you, visit the links provided. FBC works with DoD agencies to deliver virtual, hybrid, and in-person meetings to connect industry with government capability with mission. FBC DoD events cover many agencies, including NSA, DISA, U.S. Army, U.S. Indicom for events such as NSA SIGDEV, NSA IAS, WIPTIP, Pacific IOEW, the Maneuver Warfighting Conference, the Sullivan Cup, and the Doughboy Dinner. And now for a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information can be found on our website. We have launched another webinar series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month. These will take place on the second Friday of each month in 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen, and then take your live questions about that topic. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals. You can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available. And please note, you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount on each webinar. Next month, we are covering pricing with Michael, Marsha, Tracy, and Jeff. And in December, our speakers, Shirley, Joshua, Kate, and Brad, will present on M&A. Again, the discount code is DFARS to save $15 and bring your cost down to $20. And now to introduce our speaker, Noelle. Noelle, we're so happy to have you here with us today, and I'll turn over the floor to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone who's listening. My name is Noelle Slivka, and I am a government contracts attorney located in Connecticut. I've worked for about 20 years for and with manufacturers delivering products and services to the federal government. I served as in-house counsel for several divisions of a major aerospace manufacturer, and more recently as outside counsel advising companies in the government supply chain, mostly contractors supporting the Department of Defense. So today, I will cover the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, or DFARS, Part 246, Quality Assurance. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So DFARS Part 246, Quality Assurance. FAR Part 46 sets the general rules for how the federal government ensures that it is getting what it's paying for, both in terms of quality and quantity. And DFARS Part 246 supplements FAR Part 46 in areas that are of particular concern under DoD contracts. The general rules set forth in FAR Part 46 governing quality oversight, inspection, acceptance of goods and services, and post-acceptance responsibility of contractors will apply equally to DoD contracts. But in addition to the FAR requiremements, DoD solicitations and contracts may contain one or more of 8 provisions and clauses found in DFARS Subpart 252.246. As always, be sure to read your contract to know what your contract requires. But today we will cover a few smattering of topics that are covered in DFARS Part 246 and the provisions and clauses in 252.246. Next slide. So today I will cover some select topics that are included in DFARS Part 246 and the corresponding provisions and clauses. We'll go over quality oversight on DoD contracts generally, material inspection and receiving reports, often referred to as the DD-250 process, that uses the same name of the form that is used to document inspection and acceptance, the warranty of data clause, notification of potential safety issues, warranty tracking of serialized items, and finally, counterfeit part detection and avoidance, as well as sourcing of electronic parts. I will not cover today any construction-specific rules. However, if you support a business that performs construction work for DoD, please note that DFARS Part 246 also covers some unique rules for safety and habitability of construction that's for use during military operations outside of the U.S. and its territories. So if you're in that business and performing that type of construction, check DFARS Subpart 246.270 and the clause at 252.246-7004 for unique construction requirements for military construction in use for military operations. Next slide. For quality oversight on DoD contracts, the general policy is laid out in DFARS 246.102. Despite the fact that contract quality oversight is a major aspect of procurement for DoD, and much effort and many resources are dedicated to quality oversight, the DFARS does not provide very much detail about the general policies and practices of quality oversight. The general rules are that departments and agencies are directed to have a systemic, cost-effective quality assurance program, which includes conducting quality audits of contractors. Quality assurance should be tailored to this particular acquisition and to the risks of defective product and services. And DoD is supposed to allow contractors maximum flexibility in establishing efficient and effective quality programs to meet contract requirements. So the means to the end is not specifically prescribed in the regulations and really should be at the contractor's discretion, but only so long as they're actually meeting the contract requirements and delivering quality product on time. On DoD contracts, usually quality oversight, government inspection when performed, and acceptance of contract deliveries on behalf of the government is done by the Defense Contract Management Agency, or DCMA. DCMA is the face of the customer in terms of accepting product and services. It is important to keep in mind that the effectiveness of the DCMA offices is in large part dependent upon the contractor's performance. If the contractor is late or is having quality problems, the relationship between DCMA and the contractor can become contentious. I've certainly seen that happen, with the contractor wanting DCMA to get off their backs, even though it is DCMA's job to enforce quality and schedule requirements, and DCMA wanting the contractor to improve so that the government can get timely deliveries and everyone is feeling like they're performing their jobs to the best of their abilities. Next slide. So let's cover the mechanics of documenting inspection and acceptance of deliveries under DoD contracts. The main system for accepting deliveries is an electronic system known as Wide Area Workflow, or WAF. In fact, there's a clause prescribed by DFARS Part 232 that requires electronic submission of acceptance documentation and payment requests in WAF. And so that would be the standard, and the default is electronic submission of receiving reports and then payment requests. There are some exceptions to that, but please note that WAF is the standard. Nevertheless, the acceptance process under DoD contracts is commonly referred to by the number on the paper version of the form that's used to document inspection and acceptance of products, the DD-250. In fact, on defense contracts, you'll often hear the term DD-250 used as a verb, that something has been DD-250'd, to mean that deliveries have been accepted by the government under the contract. The form DD-250 itself can be found in DFARS Part 253, and DFARS Appendix F contains instructions on completing WAF receiving reports and DD-250s when they're done in paper form. Whether electronic or on paper, the acceptance documentation includes a block for the government's quality assurance representative to sign off on the delivery. So it evidences inspection where inspection has been done and acceptance of the products or services. Next slide. Now let's move on to some specific clauses that are prescribed for use under DFARS Part 246. The first is the warranty of data clause found at DFARS 252, 246-7001. The use of this clause is discretionary, not mandatory, and in fact, it's one of the few clauses in the FAR, or the DFARS, that says that the wording of the clause may even vary from the prescribed clause and its alternates. So in a word, this clause can be negotiated, and it is not required in the contract. It should only be used when practicable, cost-effective, and there's a need for greater protection against defective technical data or a period of liability for the contractor after delivery of the data. So what does the clause require? Under the clause, the contractor warrants that technical data delivered under the contract will, at the time of delivery, conform to the contract specifications and all other requirements of the contract. And the warranty remains in effect for 3 years. If, during that time period, the government determines that the technical data did not conform to the contract requirements, the contractor must correct or replace the data at the contractor's expense or be subject to a price or fee adjustment if the data is no longer required or if the government can correct the data. Under the clause alternates, which are prescribed for use in fixed price contracts, the contractor is also responsible for damages that the government incurs from defective data, with some caps on the amount as outlined in the clause. One important note, and one reason that contractors may object to this clause, is that any delivery of corrected or replacement data from the contractor starts the warranty period anew for that data, meaning that the government has another 3 years to identify a defect in that data that was delivered. In this way, the clause can operate like a perpetual warranty against defective data, and that's one of the reasons why contractors often do not like this clause and do not want it included in their contracts. So this clause is not necessarily commonly used because it's discretionary in nature, and it can be negotiated even in the language of the clause. And so it is one of those rare instances where there's quite a bit of negotiation possible with respect to this subject. Next slide. The next clause we'll cover is DFARS 252-246-7003, Notification of Potential Safety Issues. This clause imposes on the contractor the responsibility to notify the government of potential safety impacts in the event that a critical safety item or a system that has been delivered has a non-conformance that may result in a safety impact. This is a post-acceptance obligation, and the obligation does not expire at any time. There's no time period limitation on this obligation. The prescription for the clause is quite broad, it should be included in contracts for critical safety items, which is defined, or systems, subsystems, and their parts, as well as overhaul, repair, and maintenance of the same. The term system is actually not defined, although critical safety item is, and the definition of critical safety item is on the slide. It's essentially any item that, if it failed, it could cause injury, death, or loss of a weapon system or property damage greater than $1 million. The requirement in the event of a non-conformance for critical safety item or system is to provide notice to the government within 72 hours of credible information of a non-conformance, followed by written notice with additional information within 5 days. The clause also must be included in subcontracts for parts and related aftermarket services for systems, integral parts, and critical safety items. Note that the requirement of this clause is to provide notice only. The clause does not operate as a warranty or obligate the contractor to fix, replace, or cover damages due to a non-conformance. Such obligations, if they are contained in the contract, would be in other clauses. Next slide. The next topic we'll cover is warranty tracking of serialized items. This clause, DFARS 252-246-7006, and its companion solicitation provision at -7005, is prescribed for contracts for delivery of serialized items. Those are items tracked by a serial number that are delivered with a warranty. If the contract also contains the item unique identification and valuation, or UID clause, and the citation is on the slide. Under the warranty tracking of serialized items clause, the contractor must complete a warranty tracking information attachment, which is a form that the contracting officer includes with the contract, and the form has to be completed for each line item covered by a warranty. Then, when delivering warranted items, the contractor must provide the unique identifier, so the UID, and warranty repair source information and instructions for each warranted item. In other words, the information about where to go and how to send an item back to the contractor under a warranty claim. Because compliance with this clause requires labor and effort to complete forms and provide information with deliveries, the requirement has a companion solicitation provision so that the contractor has fair warning of it and may consider the cost of compliance in responding with a priced offer. Next slide. The remaining topic that we'll cover today is counterfeit electronic parts. Over the last 15 years or so, there has been increasing concern about counterfeit material in the defense supply chain, particularly counterfeit electronic parts. There were congressional hearings, government reports have been issued, and ultimately DoD put forth a clause to address the issue. DFARS 252-246-7007 requires that contractors create and maintain a system to detect and avoid counterfeit electronic parts. The clause is prescribed for contracts under which electronic parts will be supplied, except for small business set-aside contracts. That's not a complete exemption for all small businesses. It's just an exemption for small business set-aside contracts. Also, this is unusual. The text of the clause itself states that it is only applicable to prime contractors that are subject to the cost accounting standards, meaning that the prime contractor has at least one CAS-covered contract. The clause, however, is then required for all subcontracts thereunder for parts and assemblies that contain electronic parts. So what these rules mean and the applicability rules and exemptions mean is that a small business with a DoD subcontract to supply electronic parts to a prime contractor would likely be subject to the clause. But that same small business would not be subject to the requirement if it only has a prime contract with DoD, either because of the exemption for small business set-aside contracts, if that's the nature of the contract that the small business has, or because the contractor would be exempt from the cost accounting standards under the small business exemption from the cost accounting standards. So small businesses in the supply chain that are first-tier suppliers or beyond may be subject to this clause. Small businesses that are only doing business directly with DoD very well may not because of the exemptions, even though they're equally supplying electronic parts. So this clause lays out actually 12 elements that must be embedded into a counterfeit parts detection and avoidance system. The 12 elements are consolidated into 8 items on this slide for purposes of summarizing the requirements on one slide, but know that more detail is included in the clause itself. The clause also uses the term system to mean a set of processes, practices, and policies and the like that when taken together create a system. So it's not like kind of a, an app on the computer. It's really about a set of processes, practices, and policies that meet the 12 elements. And consolidated and for summary purposes, the system has to include training of employees and a process for employees to stay informed of counterfeiting trends. Inspection and testing of electronic parts according to government and industry recognized standards. The clause itself does not delineate a specific standard, but does call out that generally the standards that industry and government recognize should be used for inspection and testing of electronic parts. The system must have risk-based tracking of electronics from the original manufacturer through all the way to acceptance by the government. This standard does not necessarily require tracing of all electronic parts to the same level of detail. The tracking should relate to the risk of counterfeit parts based on factors such as the type of product or the location or country of origin of sources. So, for example, electronics from China are considered more suspect than from other countries for potential counterfeiting. The system must include the use of suppliers compliant with DFARS 252-246-7008, which we will cover in the next slide. The system must include reporting and quarantining of electronic parts that are suspected to be counterfeit. I've heard it said that there is really usually no such thing as a confirmed counterfeit part. They're all suspect, and that's really what we're talking about here. Those parts that really can't be confirmed as authentic, and there's some reason to believe that they may be suspect. The system has to include flow down of requirements to electronic suppliers at all tiers, and also screening of reports submitted to the GuideUp system. GuideUp stands for Government Industry Data Exchange Program, and the GuideUp system is a database of essentially warnings about part nonconformances, significant part failures, and suspect or confirmed counterfeit parts. Many contracts actually contain a requirement for the contractor to participate in the GuideUp program and to submit GuideUp reports when appropriate. And so under this clause, the contractor should have a process of checking GuideUp and then using GuideUp reports as alerts to the extent that they relate to parts that the contractor incorporates into its products. So it should be on the lookout for evidence of potential counterfeiting with respect to the parts that it's using, the suppliers that it's using, the sources, as well as similar parts and similar situations to what they have, because counterfeiting can sometimes end up affecting parts that maybe aren't part of the GuideUp itself, but they are similar and there's a similar behavior happening. Finally, the system must include control of obsolete parts. Parts that are no longer in production are highly susceptible to being counterfeited because the lack of supply tends to inspire bad actors to take advantage of the situation. So the original manufacturers should be controlling obsolete parts, as well as to the extent that a contractor is using parts or has an obsolescence issue within the parts that they are making or the supplies that they're producing for the government, there has to be control of obsolete parts and a particular emphasis on looking for authentic parts when trying to acquire out-of-production items. If the contractor's contracts contain this clause, DoD, likely DCMA, will evaluate the contractor's counterfeit electronic parts detection and avoidance system as part of a purchasing system review, A purchasing system review is performed when required under FAR Part 44 and DFARS Part 244. Next slide. The final slide for today's presentation covers a companion clause to the Counterfeit Electronic Parts Clause, and that is DFARS 252-246-7008, Sources of Electronic Parts. This clause lays out requirements for purchasing electronic parts. The clause sets forth a hierarchy of electronic parts sources, starting with a preference for the original manufacturer, their authorized suppliers, or suppliers that buy only from the original manufacturer or their authorized suppliers for the part. So distributors would be allowed as long as their practice is to buy from original manufacturers or the original manufacturer's authorized supplier. The term original manufacturer is defined to include original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, original component manufacturers, as well as contract manufacturers, those companies that may be supplying a part, they're actually doing the manufacturing according to another company's intellectual property and design. Each of those terms, original equipment manufacturer, original component manufacturer, contract manufacturer, and even authorized supplier, is defined in the clause. And the definitions turn generally on whether the manufacturer designed the product and has rights to intellectual property for the product, as well as contractual relationships, particularly in the definition of contract manufacturer and authorized supplier. So an authorized supplier, for example, must actually have some kind of a contract relationship with the original manufacturer, designated them as an authorized supplier. If the part cannot be obtained from preferred sources, the clause imposes additional requirements for verification of suppliers, as well as the parts obtained, and then traceability back to sources. Again, risk-based traceability, but traceability nonetheless. The actions taken to comply with these requirements must be documented, and the documentation must be made available to the government upon request. Note that the use of government sources of supply are not exempt from additional requirements to verify the authenticity of the parts, though the government will take steps to replace or otherwise make good on suspect parts obtained from government sources of supply. So sometimes the government is actually may have excess products that they sell back to industry, and those sources, those government sources of supply, are not necessarily exempt from all of these requirements. However, the government, should something turn up to be suspect counterfeit, the government will stand behind the authenticity in that they will replace the part or otherwise adjust the price to reflect the fact that the product was not what it was intended to be. So this clause, combined with the Counterfeit Electronic Parts General Clause for an electronic parts detection and avoidance system, really shows that the main concern of the government when it comes to electronic parts is the further you get away from the original manufacturer and the further you get away in time from items that are in production versus items that are not in production or even in a point of obsolescence, the more concern there is about whether or not that product is authentic. And when we talk about counterfeit parts, the concern is not only sort of trademark violations and someone making a perfectly good part and trying to pass it off as belonging to or having been manufactured by, a brand name that it was not manufactured by. That can happen. But also what can happen is just simply that the part is not going to operate as needed, and that can actually cause a major safety issue or certainly a reliability issue for equipment that's purchased by the Defense Department, and that's the major concern. So this clause, the 7008 clause, sources of electronic parts, this clause must be included in subcontracts for electronic parts, except for subcontracts with original manufacturers. So if you're doing business with the original manufacturer of a part, that would include an original component manufacturer, an OEM, or a contract manufacturer, or their authorized suppliers, then you do not have to flow this clause down to in those subcontracts. Okay, next slide. So that concludes this presentation. I strongly encourage those looking for more information about quality assurance and government contracts to listen to the webinar recorded in 2020 about FAR Part 46 if you haven't already had a chance to do so. Questions about this presentation may be directed to my contact information on this slide or to Jennifer Schaus and Associates. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Noelle, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And thanks to everyone who joined us as well. Like Noelle mentioned, if you have any questions, her contact information is available on the screen. And the recording will be available on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us next week as we cover more parts of the DFARS.